Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Joe Stunner Boxing. I hope you're doing well, and I thought we'd do something a little bit different today because no doubt you've heard of the Marquess of Queensberry's rules for boxing. What less people know is who was the Marquess of Queensberry. More specifically, who was the 9th Marquess of Queensberry, who was the guy who these rules are attributed to. Now, before we go any further, it's kind of like with the 10 Commandments. You say to people who purport to be Christians, name me the 10 Commandments. They can't name you more than 2 or 3. You know, thou shalt not kill, don't steal, gotta go. It's the same with the Queensberry rules. You know, what are they? Very few people who are boxing fans know. So I'm just going to go through them quickly before we move on to the Marquess himself. The rules are, I don't know if these are in any particular order, but number 1, boxing takes place inside a ring, not on a field. You know, it's got to be inside a stipulated enclosed space. Number 2, no wrestling is allowed. Number 3, 3-minute rounds with 1 minute's intervention between the two. So that stands today. If either man falls through weakness or otherwise, he must get up unassisted. Okay, so no one's allowed to help anyone up. The boxer has 10 seconds to allow him to do so. The other man, meanwhile, to return to his corner. And when the fallen man is on his legs, the round is to be resumed and continued until the 3 minutes have expired. If one man fails to come to the scratch in the 10 count, I presume that means get up. It shall be in the power of the referee to give his award in favour of the other man. All right, that's, you know, just if you're knocked down, you know what I mean. Number 5, a man hanging on the ropes is in a helpless state with his toes off the ground shall be considered down. So if you're hanging on the ropes and your feet aren't on the canvas, it's a knockdown. Number 6, no seconds or any other person to be allowed in the ring during the rounds. Number 7, should the contest be stopped by any unavoidable interference, the referee to name the time and place as soon as possible for finishing the contest, so that the match must be won and lost unless the backers of both men agree to draw the stakes. That doesn't sound like very modern, does it? That's sort of gone by the wayside, but obviously this was an evolving set of rules. Number 8, the gloves to be fair-sized boxing gloves of the best quality and new. So it can mean anything, of course. Back in those days, you didn't have all these gloves that you have nowadays, and of course the technology with the gloves has improved drastically. Should a glove burst, this is number 9, should a glove burst or come off, it must be replaced to the referee's satisfaction. That still stands. Number 10, a man on one knee is considered down and if struck is entitled to the stakes. So in other words, you can disqualify the other guy. That still stands, doesn't it? Number 11, no shoes or boots with spikes or sprigs. Sprigs were wire nails to be allowed. Okay. Yeah, we haven't had that for a long time. But number 12, the contest in all other respects to be governed by the revised London prize ring rules. Don't really know what that one means, but yeah. All right, so that's the 12, the original 12, and some are still with us, some have evolved, some have been kicked by the wayside, but those were the 12. And the first thing to say about the Marquess of Queensberry is that he did not invent those rules. Those rules were invented by a guy called John Graham Chambers, a Welshman who wrote them out. I think I want to say 1869. I should have looked this up before I did this video, but this guy, he came up with the rules, and the Marquess of Queensberry, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry, because there have been different ones, he sort of acted as a patron, if you like. He gave his patronage to these rules. He was very interested in boxing. He was big with horses. You know, he actually rode it, I believe, in the Grand National a few times, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry. And Mr. Chambers, who came up with the rules, was, I think he was a Welshman who was involved in a Welsh athletic club of some description. And Queensberry liked these rules and gave his patronage to them. Now, Queensberry was an absolute thug. He was born to great wealth. He had land, he had a title, a ton of money, but he was an absolute thug. And, mentally unwell, probably. What's the difference between somebody who's mentally unwell and somebody who isn't mentally unwell, but behaviourally is is an appalling person. I think it was probably a mixture of both with Queensberry, because he had he loved fighting. He was always getting into trouble with magistrates for having scraps in the street. He could normally buy his way out of it. Obviously, there's one rule for working class people, as there is nowadays pretty much, and another rule for unscrupulous members of the gentry. Anyone mention Prince Andrew? I thought you did. Yeah, so he was a thug, a cheap thug, really, or not such a cheap, an expensive thug. And he had 4 kids, and they had 3 boys and a girl. Now, he actually divorced his wife because he was just a total womanizer. He treated his wife very badly, knocked her around, domestic violence and all that. The kids hated him. 3 sons and a daughter absolutely hated the father. And eventually he did divorce. And he was also a raging atheist, if you like. Now, I'm an atheist. And trust me, when I say this to people, they say, yeah, but I've met some really, really nice religious people. And I say, yeah, so have I. I've got friends who are Christians, Muslims, terrific people. Yeah, and of course, some atheists are absolute arseholes. Step forth, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry. You were an absolute arsehole, and sadly, one of the I have to say, he was an atheist, just like I am. But this impacted on his right to take his seat in the House of Lords, because he would not swear on the Bible, which he described as a load of, I think it's Christian hokum, he said it was. I should also point out, by the way, that Queensberry was the title. His real name was John Sholto Douglas, okay? John Sholto Douglas, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry, okay? And we'll get to this is relevant later on, but as a result of not being prepared to swear on the Bible and denouncing Christianity and ridiculing it, he wasn't allowed to take his place in the House of Lords in Parliament, which was a big deal in those days, especially if you were a member of the gentry. Now, at one point, this guy he didn't spare the horses. He had some opinions to give. At one point, his eldest son, Francis, all his kids hated him, and we'll get to them one at a time. So his eldest son, Francis, did take his place in the House of Lords. And John Sholto Douglas, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry, was not happy about this, because his son was doing what he himself was denied. And he accused the Earl of Rosebery of favouring... The Earl of Rosebery supported Francis Douglas into the House of Lords, and John Sholto Douglas, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry, he said, the only reason you're supporting my son is because you're buggering him. He thought you're gay, and he described them as snob queers, and he was horrible to various other people who supported. There was, I think, one of the Roseberys ended up as a prime minister. I can't remember which one, but I've got a quote here. I'm going to read it to you. This kind of sums up John Sholto Douglas. He said, he was talking about Rosebery, and he said, I presume the savoury odour of your Jew money bags has too delicious a fragrance to allow me to expect any justice in high quarters. And then he described Prime Minister as a Christian whoremonger. That was Gladstone, by the way, in case you're wondering which Prime Minister it was. And in fact, Francis Douglas was so humiliated and so torn by this constant bullying and the fact that he wasn't allowed to live his own life that he died in a shooting accident, and a lot of people think it was a suicide. So that was one of his kids out of the way. Francis Douglas, dead by shotgun. Then we get to probably the most interesting one and probably the most famous of the Marquess of Queensberry's sons, which was Lord Alfred Douglas. Now, Lord Alfred Douglas inherited his father's contempt for other people and fiery temper. I mean, he really did. But he was a very slight guy, and he was gay. And he eventually crossed paths with Oscar Wilde, who was twice his age, and at the time was one of the most famous names in Britain. Now, Oscar Wilde, a playwright with Irish origins, went to Oxford, got a first in classics, immensely talented, witty, intelligent man, but gay in an era when being gay was illegal, and it would remain illegal for another 67 years or something like that, 70 years maybe. And this is interesting because Lord Alfred Douglas hooked up with Wilde, and his father, Douglas's father, the Marquess of Queensberry, wasn't happy about this, because he it was an open secret that Wilde had sort of what they call Greek inclinations, what we would now call gay. And he wasn't happy about this, the Marquess of Queensberry. Oh, no. He wasn't happy at all. So he started to hound Wilde, even though Wilde was very, very famous. But Wilde was too witty. For example, the Marquess of Queensberry turned up in Shaftesbury Avenue during the premiere of one of Wilde's plays. I think it was The Importance of Being Earnest. And he presented him with a bouquet of rotten vegetables. And Wilde took a sniff of them and said, "Oh, a delightful gift, Marquis. Every time I smell them, I shall think of you." So he was, and this was in front of everyone, and everybody laughed, and they all loved Wilde, and they all hated Douglas because he was a thug. But Douglas kept on and on and on. Now, Lord Alfred Douglas, his son, who was having an affair with Wilde, he hated his father, and he wanted Wilde, with all Wilde's money and wit and intelligence, to go after him. And on one occasion, again, this was when one of Wilde's plays was on, the Marquess of Queensberry left a calling card for Wilde that said, "To Oscar Wilde, posing," he meant to say as a sodomite, which means somebody who buggers people. But no. He said, he misspelt it. Somdomite. It's posing as a somdomite, which is meant to mean sodomite. I mean, the guy had a lot of privileges, the best school and everything. Poor cunt couldn't spell. So yeah, Wilde was not happy about this. How dare you say this to me, even though he was gay? But of course, you go to prison for being gay in those days. And Lord Alfred Douglas said to Wilde, "Go after him, sue him. He slandered you, sue him." And Wilde, against everybody's advice, did have the Marquess of Queensberry arrested. They went to court, and the Marquess of Queensberry and his solicitors brought through a parade of rent boys who knew Wilde, and the case was thrown out. And in fact, Wilde was then arrested as a sodomite, which was illegal in those days, was put on trial, and was eventually convicted and did 2 years hard labour in Reading jail. So he kind of dug his own grave, or rather, the Marquess of Queensberry's son, via his hatred for his father, coerced Wilde into taking on a case he couldn't win, and lost. The Marquess of Queensberry, John Sholto Douglas, won. That case was thrown out, and then Wilde was in the dock and went to prison. So, and it ruined him, completely ruined Wilde. He was dead at 46 in 1900. So, by the way, Lord Alfred Douglas, who could have been arrested and done as a sodomite as well, hid out in Paris, and of course, being the son of a Marquess, wasn't arrested, wasn't charged. And in fact, the public perception was that the Marquess of Queensberry had saved his son from the bad influence of the, disgusting homosexual Oscar Wilde, which wasn't true at all, because, Bosie, as he was called, Lord Alfred Douglas, he was bang at it. He loved the rent boys. He was, there was nothing innocent about that guy. He wasn't being led astray at all. If anything, he was leading Oscar Wilde astray. Anyway, so that's two of Douglas's kids, two of the Marquess's kids. There was a third son, Percy, who supported his brother, Lord Alfred, against the father, because all the kids hated the father. And it just so happens that the Marquess of Queensberry bumped into his son Percy in the street, and they had a fist fight, instigated by the Marquess of Queensberry. And Percy probably got the worst of it. A crowd formed. They were all watching and cheering. "Oh, look, there's a Marquess of Queensberry!" And police came along, bunged them both in jail for the night, and of course, up in front of the magistrate. He got off again. Of course, he did. But this following the Wilde trial, the Marquess of Queensberry briefly was seen as a sort of a father trying to protect his son. So he actually did have some public support. Well, once he got into it with his beating up his son, and it all came out that he was, he was. I mean, at one point he got married to a vicar's daughter or something, which lasted less than a year because he was knocking her around and cheating on her and all of that. I mean, he soon lost that public support. And what happened to his daughter? Actually, that's not something I know about, but I know she wouldn't have anything to do with him either. And talking of Percy, the son that he had a scrap with in the street, in fact, the Marquess of Queensberry ended his days sort of riddled with syphilis, and on his deathbed, the only one of the children that went to see him, only one of his kids who went to see him was Percy Douglas, and the Marquess of Queensberry, John Sholto Douglas, spat in his face. So he was unrepentant to the end, or maybe he was just mad. Maybe he's just a psychopath. I don't know. But that is the Marquess of Queensberry in a nutshell, really. A dreadful person, did not create the boxing rules, put his patronage to them, but didn't write them. Mr. Chambers, that poor sod who did write them, he was the one that, didn't get any credit, which is a shame. So yeah, a thoroughly dislikable person. But if you look at the previous Douglases, the previous Marquesses of Queensberry, going way back, there was a lot of insanity in the family, suicide. It was just one fucked up family. It's kind of sad that we now indirectly revere, sort of by proxy, if you like, revere the ninth Marquess of Queensberry because we think he invented the boxing rules. He didn't. He was a disgusting individual, and hopefully he's rotting somewhere. Well, he is rotting somewhere, but I mean, I'm not someone who believes in heaven and hell, but it's a shame there ain't a hell for him to go to. But anyway, that's the Marquess of Queensberry. I thought I'd do a little biography on him because he is an interesting character, despite being absolutely appalling. Yeah, so if you like this video, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. That'd be great. That'd help us out a lot. And thanks for your time. This video, what's this video now? About 17 minutes, 18 minutes? Yeah, it's quite a long one. Anyway, as always, thanks for your time. Take care of yourselves. We shall speak again soon. Bye-bye for now.